She looked up and thought she could see the letters engraved above the remnants of the once-upon-a-time massive gate in front of them. Small grooves in old stone, covered by moss and lichen. A stark warning for all the would-be explorers out there, Mick, her partner, used to joke. Well, today they would find out. They had been planning this excursion for a year. She felt the warm breeze coming up the mountain, but couldn't help the shivers. Who had built such a thing in such a place? Even today, with modern streets, modern cars, and all the modes of travel, it was almost a half-day's journey to get to these gates. Back when the building had been in use, it must have taken people a week to travel here from the next best village. Kara shook her head and shot her partner a glance. He looked about as tense as she felt. Not the greatest of starts, she had to admit. This building in front of them had been a monastery until around 200 years ago. A place for nuns and wayward girls, Kara liked to add, since that had been its purpose most of the time. A place where people, even wealthy ones, could send their unwanted daughters so they wouldn't tarnish the family name. That was the reason why it was so far away. So no one would escape and no one would find out what was going on here. According to its history, it had operated in one form or another for almost 400 years. Built with generous donations by rich families and some parts of the church, it had opened its doors sometime in the early 14th century. The first Mother Superior, Sister Agnes, an old nun from another monastery, had brought with her a few of her sisters and a whole bunch of orphans to help them run this place. There wasn't much about her or what she did, besides teach children, pray a whole lot, and sometimes appear in one of the villages around to ask for donations. Kara guessed that the people who had built this monastery must have been delighted with the way it had started out, since slowly but surely some very wealthy families began shipping off their daughters here. Mick had dug up all the old records that were still around, and to her surprise, they gave a very detailed picture of the finances of the place and the steady stream of people coming and going. The first nuns who had run the monastery slowly died off over the years and were replaced by the former orphans who had been brought in at the start. It wasn't a big change, at least not in any monetary way, although the influx of new girls slowed down a bit at the time. They still got money from some rich people, but now started selling stuff as well. The monastery was run like a business, but the workers were pretty much unpaid. Sometimes they got raided by bandits, even once by a foreign army, which definitely shouldn't have happened. But every time, the women picked themselves up and started their daily grind again. For over 300 years, they kept to it, choosing a new Mother Superior once the last one had died. And while the faces and names might have changed, the essence of the monastery stayed the same. That was until Emmeline arrived. The one who would give the monastery its unofficial name later. The Order of Our Broken Lady. Kara shivered as a sudden chill seemed to grip the air, and as she looked over at Mick, she could see him wincing as well. According to the records, in a letter that still survived today, Emmeline had been an orphan, but one far too unruly for any orphanage around. They tried putting her into a workhouse, but she escaped. One person even wanted to adopt her, but she apparently whipped them with a leather belt and then stormed off. So she ended up here, much to the inhabitants' chagrin. Letters following her arrival had made it into Kara's possession, and all they seemed to talk about was the new girl, Emmeline. Daily fights with her sisters, insubordinate behavior, cursing during mass, and then loud singing while she was being punished in the silent room of contemplation. She was as much of a menace as they had feared, and the author of the letter called her a test from God. They tried ignoring her, then almost starving her, then ganging up on her. Nothing worked. Months passed while this one child started breaking down the monastery's cohesion, brick by brick. It got so bad that they had sisters running away to escape Emmeline and her antics. But that all changed one evening about half a year after her arrival. A group of bandits appeared at night, demanding to be let in. The nuns were debating what to do before the Mother Superior, a nun formerly known as Sister Helen, ordered them to open the doors instead of letting the bandits break them down on their own. They tried paying them off, offering money and everything else, but those bandits apparently weren't satisfied. A fight broke out as they tried to grab the gold inlaid cross from the chapel, and, according to the letter, Emmeline was in the thick of it. No one knew if she was doing it because she felt protective of the place, or if she just wanted an outlet. But the young woman pretty much led the charge against the bandits. It didn't help much, of course. One side being outlaws, the other women who had worked hard daily, yes, but had no real experience with violence. Emmeline successfully managed to defend the cross and valuables, but got dragged off together with the money as the bandits left. Not a single one of her sisters tried to stop them. The letter made that clear. They all watched as Emmeline was beaten, grabbed, and carried out into the night through the open doors of the monastery. The next day, instead of informing anyone about the raid, the nuns reinforced the door, then went back to work. Some probably were delighted to now finally have peace again, and only a few spoke about their former sister, who had protected them in their hour of need. Well, their joy wasn't long-lived. A month after the raid, Emmeline reappeared. Beaten and bruised all over her body, teeth missing, hair torn out and covered in long-dried blood, she knocked on the door of the monastery. Even though opinions were split, the Mother Superior ordered the sisters to open the door and take her in again. From then on, Emmeline was a changed person. Instead of the rebellious youth that had been dragged off, what returned was the most fervent, zealous, and devout nun they had ever seen. They washed her, clothed her, and asked her, but she hardly spoke a word. Instead, she would fall to her knees and pray in this croaking, sputtering voice as if she were possessed. The nuns avoided her the first few days, sure she would fall back into old habits. But she didn't. In fact, the complete opposite happened. Emmeline never laughed again. During Mass, she was silent, except when it came to praying. Other sisters remarked about her, kneeling or sitting there, hunched over with her hands clasped together so tightly that her fingernails dug into her skin. The prayers she recited, she did with such fervor that a low hum could be heard coming from her. She followed every order from her superiors and was the first to volunteer if it came to hard work or meting out punishments. That was something she soon grew famous for. Without another word, she would grab her sisters by the collar and drag them off to the contemplation rooms, sometimes even locking herself in with them, kneeling on the cold stone floor in front of the door, praying until their punishment was over. It was eerie, even according to the sisters. Some in the monastery didn't believe her changed, though. They tried to keep an eye on her, watching her through a gap in her door during quiet hours, but even then, the only thing they saw her do was kneel on the floor and pray instead of sleeping. The atmosphere in the monastery grew tense, with some nuns still openly claiming that it was all an act, while others were increasingly growing fond of the new way her wayward sister was showing them. More and more nuns joined her ways, now renouncing laughter and joy, instead kneeling on hard stone, while the less devout ones were spending time chatting in the yard. It got so bad that the Mother Superior had to intervene. She ordered Emmeline, or as she was known at that time, Sister Gregoria, punished for the flimsiest of reasons, waiting for the inevitable blow-up. It didn't happen. She accepted the whipping with a smile and seemed almost giddy at first, only turning solemn and increasingly agitated when the leather belt didn't break her skin. The others, her followers, were kneeling, while the rest of the monastery was standing and watching her face turn from blissful to angry. She snatched the belt from the nun's hand, then started hitting herself with it. According to the letter, much harder than before. The sound of the leather hitting flesh echoed around the whole monastery, and with it, the smile came over her face that looked half angelic, half demonic. At least the author described it as such. The nuns, well, the ones not praying, were turning pale at the smell of blood and sounds of flesh tearing on their sister's back. But no one dared to interfere, even long after the required number of hits had been delivered. Emmeline's, well, Sister Gregoria's followers were praying louder and louder, praising the Lord for his mercy, while their leader stood there, whipping herself silently with a smile on her face. The whole episode took maybe half an hour, but at the end, Sister Gregoria dropped the now bloody belt, put back on her robes, then walked off toward the contemplation rooms without uttering a single sound, or anyone coming along besides her followers. She locked herself in one of the chambers and didn't reappear until 3 days later. Now, with her robe stained with blood, which, according to rumors back then, couldn't be washed out. From that moment on, 2 distinct factions formed inside the monastery. One side followed the Mother Superior, while the other seemed captivated by Sister Gregoria. Years passed while this standoff kept on. Emmeline's side never shied away from work or being punished, but every time one of her followers would be physically reprimanded, she herself would try to take her place. Of course, the tension inside grew more and more with each passing day. Sisters stopped talking to sisters. There was no laughter or joy anymore, and instead they all seemed wary of what the other side would do next. New arrivals saw themselves confronted with who to choose, and even though most seemed to stay on the Mother Superior's side, it slowly started to shift. Sister Gregoria had over a dozen followers by the first anniversary of her return to the monastery, and then 18 half a year later. From then on, punishments that were ordered against her or her followers would be administered by her. This crazy smile was always on her lips when she swung the much sturdier whip she herself had ordered brought in. One of the letters remarks that many of the nuns avoided going out of their rooms when the punishments were doled out by then. They were afraid of and hated the sounds the whip made, and the delighted screams and loud praying of the congregation surrounding the spot where it happened. The whole place was turning into a madhouse, according to some reports the Mother Superior got. Yet she didn't do anything against Sister Gregoria or her followers. Did she fear retribution, or was she scared that any punishment she could dole out would just strengthen her rival's power? She could have exiled them all or sent them away, but she didn't do that either. Maybe it was against her own beliefs to kick them out. It didn't matter, because in the end, that rift that had formed between the factions could soon no longer be ignored. It actually was a big deal when it happened for the first time. One of the nuns, a woman named Sister Anna, was caught sneaking food out of their mess hall. The problem was that she was part of Sister Gregoria's faction, and as soon as Mother Superior's assistants turned up at her room, they found her not alone, but surrounded by her friends. Emmeline stepped forward and talked to the assistants in her now well-known, quiet voice. According to a report, she told them that she would handle it and that the Lord himself would oversee her punishment. No need for outside involvement. That, apparently, was a step too far. Her faction was now treating the rest of the monastery as outsiders. Mother Superior's assistants tried to force their way into the room, but they were quickly subdued, then dragged out into the yard and whipped, while nuns stood around them and sang the Lord's praise. The commotion they made, especially those assistants, drew in the rest of the monastery. Nuns came from everywhere, some to watch, others to intervene, but not a single one managed to break through the circle Sister Gregoria's followers had formed. They had to listen to their screams of pain and suffering, much louder and more fearful than normal, until finally the Mother Superior herself arrived. What followed was a long, drawn-out shouting match between her and Sister Gregoria, who finally, mercifully stopped whipping those assistants, who were by now bloody and bruised. Two of the letters talk about how, when she was screaming at Mother Superior, the old Emmeline seemed to return for a short while. She sounded petulant and aggressive, with her voice raised high amidst the cheers of her supporters. Mother Superior finally asked them all to leave, but by that point it was already too late. Instead of packing up and turning away, the nuns committed to Sister Gregoria's ways began attacking the rest. The reports that made it out were mostly written by her own followers, so they shouldn't be believed fully. But as night fell, the whole monastery was under Sister Gregoria's control. A few lines in one of the letters speak of what happened to the old Mother Superior, and her demise was decidedly not enviable. She and her assistants were all whipped until they broke, then dragged off and buried in coffins on the premises, still breathing, begging, and screaming. And thus, the reign of the new Mother Superior started. All those uninvolved bent their knees to the new head of the monastery. She changed its name to the Order of Our Broken Lady, probably in memory of what happened to her. Or maybe it was a last insult to the former Mother Superior, then closed the doors of the convent for 3 months to get her affairs in order. There are no reports of what went on in there during that time, but one could be sure it wasn't anything good. People who came were sent away, not able to deliver their money or food or get promised wares out of the convent either. And as the doors finally opened again, the monastery had turned into something far more sinister. There is a letter that was sent to one of the bishops from a traveler who passed by a week after the reopening. It spoke of a clade of darkly dressed women standing by as he came closer. They weren't talking, greeting him, or doing anything but staring at him. He felt threatened, even though none of them moved, but he spoke of the smell of blood in the air. And as he turned and ran, he saw them marching back inside again, silent and bowed. The bishop himself sent a delegation to the monastery, ordering them to find out what exactly was going on in there. But they too returned without anything to show for it. Of course, they announced themselves and even got the nuns to open the doors, but as soon as they stepped inside, all they could hear was silence. Every single nun in the monastery stood there, forming a path for them from the big gate to the front door of the main building. They all wore these dark outfits, held a rosary in their hands, bound together by leather straps, and stared at them with those dead eyes while their lips moved silently but incessantly. Their visit marked the first time the new Mother Superior met with anyone from outside the monastery. While the nuns wore dark-colored clothing, almost like mourning robes, Emmeline now had her own outfit. A red one instead of white. Blood red, according to the letters. She too held a rosary between her fingers as she stood in front of the main building and barred their way. The man who had led the investigation was pretty shaken when he saw her. He told the bishop that the one leading the nuns looked strange. Her eyes shone with this brilliance, but the hands she held the rosary in were scarred and scabbed over. She hardly spoke more than a few words, just told him to leave and not return. And after looking around and seeing all the other women grabbing something hidden beneath their robes, he nodded and led the people who had come with him out of the monastery again. He told the bishop to send someone else, that there was something unnatural going on in this place. But sadly, his words fell on deaf ears. Instead, he was asked 2 simple questions. Are they dangerous? Are they heretical? Well, he hadn't seen anything like that, but the feeling they were giving off almost made him nod. In the end, though, he couldn't affirm it with certainty. And with that, the first investigation into the monastery closed before it could even fully begin. There aren't many letters or records from the nuns at that time. It almost looked like the new Mother Superior didn't want anything leaking outside. What was known was that the monastery itself had changed. The only time anyone saw any of the nuns now, though, was when they came down and went to the orphanages, asking for new children. At first, the people seemed to be happy, willingly giving them the kids since the convent didn't even demand money anymore to take care of them. But after about a year, people started to become suspicious. Every month, 3 nuns would appear at every orphanage, asking for new recruits. They always wore those same expressions, always said the same exact words, then walked off in complete silence. The people running the homes for the kids sent each other letters confirming that all of them had to deal with these 3 sisters. It was like they were either trying to increase their numbers or doing something very, very bad with the children. But the people with authority either didn't care or didn't know about it. After a few more months and another round of letters, the orphanages stopped giving children to the monastery at all. Every time the nuns appeared at one of their places, they would send them away, which, at least for half a year, seemed to work. Then things started happening around the villages close to the monastery. People disappeared. Well, children did. It was, of course, common at the time that sometimes someone would either run off or go missing, but such disappearances would normally be few and far between. Now, 12 people had vanished in the last months alone. Mostly children. Mostly girls. Rumors started springing up. Some claimed it had to be a wild beast or animals that took them, while others reported that they had seen dark figures walking along the roads at night. Hunters went out into the woods to look for tracks, but they came back empty-handed. It was like the children had been swallowed up by the earth itself. Of course, it didn't take long for the rumors to change in a different direction. The nuns had stopped visiting the orphanages altogether, and the owners and workers in those places made sure to let the people know about it. So, the townsfolk began to talk, and then, after a while, around a dozen or so of them made the long trek up to the monastery to demand answers. They were greeted as everyone else with a closed door. It took them hours of shouting and demanding to be let in, before suddenly it opened, and what greeted them were the same 2 rows of dark-clad nuns with dead eyes, forming a path for them to come through. The people from the villages didn't want to be intimidated, so they walked in, everyone armed with at least a dagger. What followed was a tense standoff as they reached the front door of the main building and saw Emmeline, waiting there in her blood-red habits, staring at them with almost glowing eyes. It's not known what exactly was said between the parties, only that after a time, one of the people of the village spotted a figure in one of the windows, up in the main building. A fight broke out, and at least that was thoroughly documented. 2 nuns died, and 4 of the villagers lost their lives, while the rest got thrown out, their bodies covered in cuts and bruises from heavy clubs and whips. What really bothered them, though, was later put down in one of the letters they sent out to the magistrates and higher religious figures of the area. According to them, when one of the people from the village pulled out his knife, all the nuns grabbed the weapons hidden beneath their habits, whips and clubs. They didn't speak or shout. They lifted up their arms and started advancing on them as if following orders. The leader of the townsfolk stabbed one of the nuns between her ribs, but the woman didn't let out a single sound of pain, nor did she stop. It was, according to him, like fighting someone already dead. Their eyes didn't waver as they mercilessly beat them. One of the nuns got a knife to the neck and collapsed, and yet her sister simply stepped over her to continue the onslaught. An eerie silence was only broken by the sound of whips tearing flesh, and the people from the town groaning and crying. They were pushed out before the door fell shut behind them, and the voice of the Mother Superior told them never to come back again. The people in the towns were understandably incensed. Letters were sent to anyone who could possibly do something, from high magistrate figures in a city nearby to the bishop and religious congregations. They made such a commotion that soon the whole area was talking about it. And the Mother Superior got a new nickname: the Demonic Nun. Meanwhile, more children disappeared, but now it wasn't only happening to the villagers close by. The magistrate wanted to help, but couldn't, since the monastery was officially a part of the church. So the people of the towns marched to the bishop, demanding that something be done. To his credit, he actually listened to them. He sent a delegation of officials, but they never returned. In the end, the bishop asked for help, not just from the church itself, but also from the next biggest city. A few hundred soldiers stormed the monastery half a year later and put down the rebellious order. It wasn't an easy fight by all accounts. Far more were wounded than was expected. Some even died. The nuns fought more like beasts than humans, scratching and clawing, biting if they lost their weapons. But again, never uttering a single sound or showing any kind of hesitation. There were stories about nuns with severed arms still trying to bite the necks of the soldiers, while their blood pooled on the ground. They managed to take captive the demonic nun and her closest aides after they barricaded themselves in the Mother Superior's office, at which point they started clearing out the rest of the monastery. What they found there, though, were scenes from a nightmare. There were close to 100 children being kept in the basement and the punishment rooms. Some were dead, others still alive. They were being trained in strange ways, their eyes already losing their light. A mass grave with small bones was discovered in the back of the estate, where they also found the coffins containing the remains of the old Mother Superior and her followers, with scratch marks on the inside of the lids. The bishop was enraged, to say the least. He ordered all the still alive nuns to be tortured right then and there, then put to death at the stake. Not a single one of them uttered a sound during the torture or while being burned alive. All besides the Mother Superior. She laughed as flames rose up her body while looking at the people around her with those strange eyes, then promised them retribution. Even her last words were filled with hate and malice. The soldiers waited until the fires of the stakes went out, then dumped the charred bones into the mass grave and closed the doors of the monastery forever. From then on, people had avoided this place, making long detours just to stay away from it, since some in these parts still remembered the horror of the demonic nun and her monastery of death. Kara shook her head, then stepped forward, and her partner Mick followed. The door to the monastery was a shadow of its former self. It must have looked like an almost impenetrable barrier for the people a few hundred years back, but now the metal was rusty and the wood looked rotted through. But still, something inside of her warned her that breaking it open would be difficult. Her hand touched the metal, and suddenly she heard a loud creaking noise as the entrance slowly swung inward. Kara turned and looked at Mick, who was shaking his head. This was a bad sign, but still her feet moved forward and into the shadows that shouldn't be there. It was like someone was calling out to her. She walked on, heard Mick's footsteps behind her, but could only concentrate on what was ahead. 2 rows of shadowy figures stood and made a path for her. Kara swallowed hard and felt her body shivering. Something was there, something besides the shadowy figures. It was calling her. She walked and felt cold eyes on her, then looked up and could see a figure standing up ahead, where the 2 rows of shadowy nuns ended. It was greeting her. Kara felt her legs stop and turn weak. There, maybe 10 steps away, in front of the broken-down door of the main building, someone was waiting. The shadow was red, and the gaze coming from the figure felt searing hot.
Pain is salvation,
a voice whispered as a cold breeze blew past her and ruffled her hair.
Through pain, we shall find peace,
it continued, and Kara felt her body freezing up.
Suffering is mercy,
the voice spoke, now louder, as if moving closer.
Only through suffering shall we get revelation.
Kara felt as if a hand was touching her shoulder, then her chin. It softly, gingerly pulled at her until she lowered her eyes and had to look at the ground by her feet. There, something lay. A dark object made of weathered leather. It smelled like blood.
Silence is the answer,
the voice, so close now, whispered into her ear.
Through silence, we shall find ourselves.
Kara suddenly noticed that she was bending down, her hand stretched out and grabbed the handle of the whip that should have fallen apart 100 years ago. But it felt firm. It felt righteous. Its handle fit right into her palm. The voice whispered into her ear, and this time she could feel her own lips moving with the words. Blood is our purpose, she spoke, looked up and turned around. Someone was standing there, staring at her. Through blood, we shall cleanse the world. Kara felt this rush of anger running through her as her arm rose as if on its own, and the whip swung backwards. Someone was calling her name. She looked and could see the face of an old man in front of her. Part of her knew him and screamed at her to bring down the whip, to show him the true meaning of salvation, to bathe this world in blood.
Kara!
A voice broke through the haze. Her arm shot down, and with a crack, the whip cut the air. She was taken off her feet, looked up, and could see Mick above her, both his hands on her shoulders, holding her down. There was a red mark across his face as he looked at her pleadingly. Kara wanted to scream, but her throat was shut. The voice was still whispering in her ear, telling her to get out, to get revenge. She shook her head, rolled over, jumped up, and threw the whip as far away as possible. We need to get out. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone. Mick grabbed her by the arm and pulled her along as around them, the dark-clad figures started to gather. The gate was still open. Kara ran with her partner, heard the voice hiss into her ear again. The gaze was still on her, still looking at her, waiting for her to turn around. She could feel her heart beating so fast. Mick pulled her along. His feet crossed the threshold. And at that moment, Kara heard the hinges of the gate moving. Kara threw herself at him, felt the cold air blowing past her, then screamed as her body hit the ground and the massive gate fell shut right behind her. She could hardly move. Her body was shaking. Kara looked up and could see Mick with the red mark across his deathly pale face. He was trembling as well, but not as badly as she. She turned and looked at the monastery. From behind the gate, the voice could still be heard. It was reciting its prayer again and again and again, because it knew, sooner or later, someone else would come here. Someone who would set it free and help it bathe the world in blood.